Daddy, please don't leave me. Not today. Not like this. Those were the last words Elena Brooks whispered into her father's chest as the machines around him slowed, beep by fading beep, in the cold hospital room. Her hands were gripping his thin hospital gown, like if she held tight enough, she could anchor him here, like love alone might be stronger than cancer. But love wasn't enough. Less than 24 hours later, less than a day after she buried the only person who had ever loved her without conditions, Elena stood frozen outside a county courthouse in Harris County, Texas, watching her husband sign a marriage license with another woman. Her husband, Daniel Moore. His mistress, Rachel Lawson. Rachel leaned in close as the clerk stamped the papers, her manicured hand resting possessively on Daniel's arm. She smiled and whispered something Elena couldn't hear, but Elena knew exactly what it was. She had heard it before, in the hospital, when her father's heart monitor had flatlined. Finally. Elena was 6 months pregnant. Her belly stretched the black dress she still hadn't changed out of since the funeral. She clutched her father's old jacket to her chest, the fabric worn thin at the elbows, still carrying his smell, coffee, soap, and something unmistakably safe. Her baby would never meet her grandfather. Less than 12 hours earlier, Elena had stood at her father's grave, her fingers still stained with damp soil from placing roses on his casket, and now she was here, watching her husband marry his mistress while the earth on her father's grave was still fresh. But what shattered her wasn't just the betrayal, it was the envelope shaking in her hands. The envelope her father had pressed into her palm with his last ounce of strength, his voice barely a whisper. "Baby girl, when I'm gone, open this. And remember, you are never alone. You are never poor. You are never powerless. I made sure of that." Daniel didn't know that when he kissed his new wife, the woman who should have comforted his grieving pregnant spouse, he was walking away from something far bigger than a marriage. Rachel didn't know that while she smiled in triumph at the broken woman dressed in funeral black, Elena's father, the quiet school janitor who had worked 35 years at an elementary school in Houston, wasn't just a janitor. He was a secret billionaire worth over $5 billion. A man who worked night shifts and Christmas mornings so his daughter could have birthday presents. A man who skipped meals so she could take dance lessons. A man who chose humility over luxury so she would grow up knowing that character mattered more than cash. And in exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes, when Elena's shaking hands would finally open that envelope, Rachel Lawson would scream so loud in a parking garage that the sound would echo off concrete walls like an animal in pain. "Oh my God, Daniel, you left a billionaire. You divorced a billionaire for me. What have we done?" But to understand how everything reached this moment, how Elena's father knew exactly what Daniel would do, we have to go back 24 hours earlier. The hospital room smelled like disinfectant and endings. Elena had been sitting in the same plastic chair for 16 hours straight, her fingers laced with her father's, watching the monitors measure out his last moments in slowing numbers and widening spaces between beeps. Robert Brooks lay beneath crisp white sheets that made his skin look gray, his body smaller than Elena had ever seen it. To her, he had always been larger than life. He was the man who taught her how to ride a bike before sunrise, because his shift started at 7, the man who showed up to every parent-teacher conference in a faded work uniform smelling like pine cleaner and effort, sitting in tiny chairs with impossible pride. Every night before bed, no matter how tired he was, he told her the same thing. "You are brilliant. You are worthy. You are loved beyond measure." And now, he was leaving her. The cancer had come fast, pancreatic, stage 4, from diagnosis to death in barely 3 months. The doctors had said 6 months if she was lucky. She hadn't been. Elena's phone buzzed in her lap. A text from Daniel. "Still at the hospital? My presentation got moved to tomorrow. I'm staying at Mike's tonight to prep. Don't wait up." Her father was dying right now, and Daniel was worried about work. She turned the phone face down. Her father's eyes fluttered open. "Elena," he whispered, his voice thin as torn paper. "I'm here, Daddy." He squeezed her hand with surprising strength. "I need to tell you something. Listen carefully." "Save your energy," she begged. "We'll talk when you're better." He shook his head slowly. "No more pretending." He struggled for breath. "In my apartment, bedroom closet, old shoebox, false bottom. There's a key." "A key?" "Safety deposit box, First National Bank, box 1247. She was crying now, nodding even though she didn't understand. "Promise me you'll go. Promise you won't tell anyone until you understand." "I promise." "Not Daniel," he said suddenly, sharper. "Especially not Daniel." Her breath caught. "I see how he looks at you," her father whispered, "like you're a burden now." The machines began to change their rhythm. "I added something to my will 3 weeks ago. Protection." A nurse rushed in, then stopped. Robert Brooks smiled at his daughter, gentle and certain. "You were the best thing I ever did." And then he was gone. The monitor flatlined, and Elena Brooks's world went silent. The rain came down hard over Oakwood Cemetery in Austin, like the sky itself was grieving. Elena stood at the edge of her father's grave, her black dress soaked through, one hand resting on her swollen belly as the pastor's words blurred into a distant hum. She couldn't hear anything over the roar in her head, the desperate voice insisting this couldn't be real, that any second now her dad would walk up behind her and say, "Just kidding, baby girl, I'm not going anywhere." But the mahogany casket lowering into the ground said otherwise. The roses she'd placed on top, bright yellow, his favorite, were already wilting in the rain, petals tearing loose and washing into the mud. There weren't many people. A few of her father's coworkers from the elementary school, 2 neighbors from his building, and some distant relatives she barely recognized. Her father had lived quietly, loved deeply, and died leaving a hole in the world so big Elena didn't know how to breathe around it. Daniel stood beside her, but he might as well have been a stranger in the next state. He held an umbrella over his own head, not hers. He checked his phone every few minutes, jaw tight with impatience. When the pastor said, "Ashes to ashes," Daniel let out a loud sigh, like this was an inconvenient meeting that had gone overtime. Elena turned her face slightly and really looked at him. This man had promised to love her in sickness and health, for better or worse, but he couldn't even pretend to care that she'd just lost her father, the only family she had left. When the service ended, people filed past with quiet condolences she would never remember. Daniel leaned in close and whispered, "I need to head out. Got a thing with some clients." Elena stared at him. "A thing?" "I know it's bad timing," he murmured, as if that was the worst part. "But this deal's been in the works for months. I can't just—" "My father was buried 5 seconds ago," she said, her voice flat. "And you have a thing?" He flinched, then tried on a look that almost resembled guilt. "You've got people here. You'll be fine. I'll see you at home later." He kissed her forehead, quick, automatic, like you'd pat a dog, and walked away through the rain toward the parking lot. He pulled his phone out before he even reached his car. Elena watched him go, something cracking inside her so quietly she didn't even have a name for it yet. An older woman approached, Mrs. Alvarez, the front office assistant at her dad's school. She hugged Elena with surprising strength, smelling like lavender and old paper. "Your daddy was the best man I ever knew. He talked about you every single day. You were his whole world." Elena couldn't speak. She nodded, lips trembling. Mrs. Alvarez pulled back, her eyes glossy. "He told me something a few weeks ago. He said, 'Maria, my baby girl is stronger than she knows, and soon she's going to need every bit of that strength.' I didn't understand then." She squeezed Elena's hand once. "But honey, whatever you're facing, you've got his blood. That means you've got steel in your spine." Then she walked away with Elena in the rain, with her father's final warnings echoing like thunder. That night, Elena sat alone in her father's small apartment on the east side of Austin, surrounded by the life he'd built. The threadbare couch he'd owned forever, the small TV that barely got channels, the kitchen table where he'd helped her with homework and taught her that the best conversations happened over simple food and real love. She should have been packing his things, doing the practical tasks that come after death, but she couldn't move. She sat wearing his old jacket, breathing in what was left of him, trying to understand what he meant about the safety deposit box, about protection, about not telling Daniel. Her phone rang. Daniel. "Hey," he said. Background noise loud, music, laughter. "Just checking in. You okay?" "Where are you?" Elena asked. "Grab dinner with the team. You know how it is. Had to decompress after today. Heavy day." Heavy day, like he was the one who just buried a father. "When are you coming home?" "Probably late," he said. "We might hit a bar. You should rest. You look exhausted." "I buried my father today," Elena said, her voice cracked on the word dad. "I know," Daniel said, irritation creeping in like she was being unreasonable. "Look, I gotta go order food. Take a bath. I'll see you tomorrow." He hung up before she could respond. Elena stared at her phone, stunned by how empty the line sounded when the call ended. And that's when she saw it. A notification at the top of her screen. Daniel had been tagged in a photo. Her hands shook as she opened it. There he was in a glossy, trendy restaurant in downtown Austin, sitting in a booth like the world wasn't falling apart. And pressed close to him, laughing, perfectly polished, wearing a red dress that probably cost more than Elena's rent, was a woman Elena had never met in person, but she'd heard the name. Rachel Lawson, senior marketing director at Daniel's company, the boss he always had meetings with, the reason he was always working late. The caption read, "Celebrating new beginnings with my favorite people." Elena clicked Rachel's profile. It was public. Luxury vacations, designer bags, expensive hotels, smiling selfies in places Elena had only seen in ads. And 3 posts down, another photo. Daniel with his arm around Rachel's waist, Rachel's hand on his chest, both of them smiling like they'd won something. Posted 6 weeks ago, while Elena had been sleeping in hospital chairs and watching her father fade, while Elena was pregnant, while Elena was drowning. The caption read, "When you know, you know." Elena's vision blurred. She scrolled again. More pictures. A concert, a weekend beach trip to Miami, a photo that looked like a hotel room, cropped carefully, but not carefully enough. Her stomach turned. She ran to the bathroom and vomited, her body rejecting the truth like poison. When she finally stopped shaking, she looked at herself in the mirror. Swollen eyes, pale face, black dress, her belly rounding beneath her old father's oversized jacket. She looked exactly like what she felt like, a woman who had lost everything. And in that moment, Elena made a decision. Tomorrow morning, she would go to the bank. She would open safety deposit box 1247. She would find out what her father meant when he said she would never be powerless. Her phone rang again. Daniel. "By the way, we need to talk when I come by tomorrow. Something important." Elena stared at those words and felt it in her bones the way you feel a storm rolling in. She didn't know exactly what was coming, but she knew it wouldn't be kind. The next morning came too fast and too slow at the same time. Elena hadn't slept. She'd spent the night on her father's couch, clutching his jacket like a life preserver, staring at the ceiling and listening for Daniel's keys in the lock. He never came. At 6:02 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from Daniel. Crashed at Mike's, coming by at 9. We need to talk. Important. Elena's hand went automatically to her belly. Her baby, her little girl, the doctor had confirmed just last week, kicked hard, like she could feel her mother's fear. It's okay, Elena whispered, voice raw. We're going to be okay. Grandpa promised. But she had no idea what the plan was, only that her father had insisted there was one. At 8:30, she forced herself into the shower. The hot water didn't soothe anything, it just made her cry harder. She dressed slowly, moving like her limbs were filled with wet sand. She chose the same simple black dress from the funeral because everything else felt too bright, too alive for the way she felt inside. She made coffee she wouldn't drink. Then she sat at the kitchen table and waited. Daniel arrived at 9:17, which meant he'd made her wait on purpose. A small cruelty, a power play. She noticed it now in a way she never had before. He looked rested, clean, like a man who hadn't spent the last 24 hours watching someone die. He wore expensive cologne, new, sharp, unfamiliar. For a flash, Elena wondered if he'd spent the night with Rachel. The thought hit her stomach like a brick. Hey, he said, not quite meeting her eyes. How you holding up? Elena stared at him. How do you think I'm holding up? I buried my father yesterday. Right, he said quickly. Yeah. He sat across from her and she saw it then. A folder in his hand. Manila, crisp, official. The kind lawyers use. Her pulse started hammering. Look, Daniel began, voice careful, almost rehearsed. He slid the folder across the table like he was closing a deal. I want a divorce. The words landed with physical force, stealing her breath even though she'd known it was coming, even though every cell in her body had been bracing for it since the hospital. What? Elena heard herself say, like the word belonged to someone else. I'm not happy, he continued, tone practiced. I haven't been for a long time. We've grown apart. Her fingers curled against the edge of the table to keep from shaking. My father died yesterday. I know, Daniel said, and somehow managed to sound like the victim. And I'm sorry, but honestly, you've been so focused on your dad's illness, and I need something different. Elena blinked hard. Focused? He was dying. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm not saying it wasn't hard. I'm saying this marriage hasn't been working, and prolonging it doesn't help anyone. He was using his sales voice now, the smooth one he used in presentations, the one that made people believe he cared. I already talked to a lawyer, Daniel said. It can be simple, clean. You keep the apartment, I'll pay child support. We can both move on. Move on, Elena repeated, hollow. To who? She pulled out her phone with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. She opened Rachel's profile and shoved it across the table. Daniel's face went blank so fast it was almost impressive. Elena's voice rose. How long? He didn't answer. How long have you been sleeping with her while I was sitting in a hospital watching my father die? Her throat burned. While I'm pregnant with your baby. Don't do this, Daniel muttered, eyes flicking away. Don't do this? Elena's laugh came out broken. You asked me for a divorce the day after my father's funeral? The timing isn't ideal, Daniel said, and the way he said it, like he was inconvenienced, made something inside Elena go cold. Not ideal, she repeated, incredulous. That's what you call it. Daniel leaned back, irritation bleeding through his calm. Rachel and we connect. She understands me. She's ambitious, she's successful, she's going places. She understands the kind of life I want to build. Every word cut. And what about me? Elena asked, her voice shaking. What was I to you? You're a good person, he said, and the pity in his tone was worse than anger. You really are, but you are never going to be enough for the life I want to build." Elena's eyes stung so sharply she thought she might go blind. "I'm carrying your child." "I know," he said, like it was a fact on a spreadsheet. "And I'll support the baby financially. I'm not a monster, but I can't stay in a marriage that makes me miserable just because of biology." He stood, buttoned his jacket, and nodded toward the folder. "Sign the papers. My lawyer will contact you about details. I'll come by this weekend for my stuff." "Daniel," Elena whispered, hating the desperation in her own voice. "Please." He paused at the door, looked at her, and in his eyes she didn't see love or regret. She saw relief. "You'll be okay," he said softly. "You're strong. You'll figure it out." Then he left, just walked out, leaving her sitting there pregnant, freshly orphaned, with divorce papers on the table and a future that felt like a black hole. Elena sat in the silence, her father's warning replaying in her head. "I see how he looks at you like a burden." Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. "Hi, Elena. This is Rachel. I know this must be hard, but Daniel and I are in love. We'd appreciate your discretion and cooperation during this transition. We'd like to move forward with our lives as quickly as possible. Thank you for understanding." The audacity hit Elena like a slap. Something shifted in her then, something sharp and clear. She stood up, grabbed her keys, pulled her father's jacket around her shoulders, and drove straight to First National Bank because she was done feeling powerless. The bank sat on a quiet corner in downtown Austin, all stone columns and polished glass, the kind of building meant to make people feel small. Elena walked inside with her shoulders squared anyway. Her belly led the way, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone, even if it felt that way. The air smelled like marble and money. She approached the information desk, her voice steadier than she felt. "I need to access safety deposit box 1247. The woman behind the counter typed quickly, eyes moving across the screen. Then she paused. Her expression changed. "One moment, please," she said, suddenly formal. "I need to get the branch manager." Elena's stomach tightened. Within minutes, a man in a tailored navy suit appeared, mid-50s, calm, polished. "Ms. Brooks?" he asked gently. "I'm Thomas Whitaker, branch manager. Please follow me." He led her past the main floor, through a secured door, and into a private room. He used his key, then handed her a second one. "I'll give you some privacy," he said, and quietly closed the door behind him. Elena sat alone at the table, the metal box resting in front of her like it weighed 100 pounds. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. Inside was a single, thick envelope. Her father's handwriting covered the front. Elena pressed it to her chest for a moment, breathing hard, then opened it. The first thing she saw was the letter. "My baby girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hate that I couldn't explain this to you in person, couldn't see your face, couldn't hold you while you processed everything. I know you're probably scared, confused, hurting in ways words can't touch. I'm so sorry. But Elena, it's time you know the truth." Beneath the letter were documents, so many documents. Property deeds, stock certificates, trust agreements, bank statements with numbers so large they didn't look real. She forced herself to focus on the letter. "My real name is Robert Whitmore III. I was born into a family that valued power, money, and appearances above all else. My grandfather built Whitmore Industrial Group into an empire. I was supposed to inherit it. I was supposed to marry someone, quote, appropriate and play my part. But then I met your mother." Elena's breath hitched. She was kind, brilliant, ordinary in all the ways that mattered, and my family hated her. They told me to choose, her or the inheritance. I chose love. I walked away, changed my name, took a job mopping floors, and I never regretted it, not once. Elena's tears fell freely now. "When your mother died bringing you into this world, I chose you. Every day. I wanted you to grow up normal, to know who you were without money confusing the lesson, to marry someone who loved you, not your bank account. So I stayed quiet, but I never gave it up. I managed it from a distance, grew it, protected it, for you. 3 weeks ago, I changed everything. Elena's heart pounded. I saw what Daniel was becoming. I heard the way he spoke about you, about the pregnancy, about me. He came to see me in the hospital. He complained about bills, about timing. He asked if I had life insurance to offset the burden. That's when I knew. The next day, I made the trust irrevocable, bulletproof. No spouse, current or future, can ever touch it, not under any circumstance. Elena squeezed her eyes shut, sobbing. Everything you see here belongs to you. Current valuation, $5.1 billion. The number made her dizzy. 5 billion. Her father, the man who ate ramen so she could dance, who drove a car held together with tape, was worth more than she could comprehend. But the next paragraph broke her open. I know Daniel is going to leave you, and baby girl, I need you to understand something. Him leaving is a gift. He is leaving because he thinks you are poor, because he thinks you are weak, because he believes he can do better. Let him go. Let him build his little life, and when you're ready, after you've healed, you live so fully, so beautifully, that his regret becomes unbearable. Not with revenge, with grace. That's our way. I love you more than all the money in the world. Dad. Elena sat there for nearly 2 hours, rereading the letter, flipping through documents, trying to breathe through the magnitude of it all. Her phone felt heavy in her hand as she dialed the number printed on the attorney's card clipped to the file. Whitmore and Ash Legal Group? A man answered immediately. This is Elena Brooks, my father, Robert Whitmore. There was a pause. Then his voice changed. Ms. Brooks, we've been expecting your call. I'm Henry Whitmore. Your father was my uncle. Her breath caught. I'm so sorry for your loss. He was an extraordinary man, and he made sure you would be protected. He predicted your husband would leave. Elena swallowed hard. He already did. I know, Henry said gently. Your father prepared for that exact scenario. Everything is in place. Nothing Daniel does can touch you. When the call ended, Elena sat back, one hand on her belly, the other resting on the envelope. Daniel had walked away because he thought she had nothing. Rachel had smiled because she thought she had won. Neither of them had any idea what they had just lost. Elena closed the box, stood, and left the bank with a calm she hadn't felt in months. She wasn't powerless. She never had been. Elena drove back to her father's apartment in a daze, the city blurring past her windshield like a life she no longer belonged to. She didn't cry this time. The tears felt spent, wrung out by grief and shock, and something new she didn't quite recognize yet. Not happiness, not relief, something steadier, heavier, like the ground finally settling beneath her feet. When she got inside, she set the envelope on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. $5 billion. The number still didn't feel real. It felt like a typo, like something meant for someone else. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. Did you sign the papers? No hello, no apology, just logistics. Elena picked up the pen he'd left behind and signed every page without hesitation. Her hand didn't shake. When she was done, she slid the papers back into the folder, placed them in a large envelope, and wrote his lawyer's address neatly on the front. Then she typed a single reply. Yes, you're free. The response came almost instantly. Thank you for being reasonable about this. I hope you find happiness. She stared at the words, the casual cruelty of them, the assumption that he was being generous, that she should be grateful. She deleted the message without replying. Her phone buzzed again, this time with a notification from Instagram. Rachel had posted. Elena hesitated before opening it, but curiosity won. The photo showed Rachel and Daniel standing inside a jewelry store, bright lights reflecting off glass cases. Rachel held her hand out, fingers spread, a large ring catching the light. The caption read, "When you know, you know. New chapter." Engaged. The same day he'd asked for a divorce, the same week Elena had buried her father. Something inside Elena went quiet. Not numb, not angry. Clear. She set the phone down, walked into her father's bedroom, and opened the closet. The old shoebox was still there, just like he'd said. She ran her fingers along the false bottom, feeling the slight give, and smiled faintly through tears. "You really thought of everything," she whispered. That night, Elena slept for the first time since the hospital. Not well, but enough. The next morning, she packed a small bag and booked a flight to New York City. Henry had offered a private jet. She declined. She wasn't ready for that world yet. She wanted one more day of being just Elena Brooks. At the airport, she moved slowly, hand resting protectively on her belly as she waited to board. No one recognized her. No one knew who she was or what she carried inside her, in every sense of the word. On the plane, she stared out the window as Texas disappeared beneath the clouds. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Trust the plan." When she landed in New York, a driver was waiting for her anyway. Henry hadn't taken no for an answer entirely. She let herself be driven this time, exhaustion pressing down on her bones. The offices of Whitmore and Ash occupied the entire top floor of a sleek glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Everything was quiet and soft and expensive in a way that felt unreal. The receptionist stood immediately when Elena stepped out of the elevator. "Miss Brooks," she said with a respectful nod, "they're ready for you." The hallway was lined with framed portraits, men and women in suits, stern faces, generations of Whitmores. Elena walked past them slowly until she stopped. At the end of the hall was a portrait of a young man with kind eyes and a smile that looked like it wanted to escape the frame. Her father. Young, confident, untouched by sacrifice yet. Elena pressed her fingers to the glass. "I see you now," she whispered. Henry greeted her with a warm hug that felt surprisingly grounding. He introduced her to the team, financial advisors, accountants, estate managers, people who had quietly worked for her father for years without her ever knowing. They spent hours going through everything: commercial real estate across 12 states, majority shares in multiple corporations, an art collection worth hundreds of millions of dollars, liquid assets that made her head spin. "And your father established a foundation," one woman said gently. "500 million set aside. It's ready whenever you are." Elena swallowed. "For women," she said. "Women who feel trapped, alone, like I did." Henry smiled softly. "He knew you'd say that." As the meeting ended, Henry slid one final letter across the table. Elena recognized the handwriting immediately. She opened it slowly. "Marcus didn't leave because you weren't enough. He left because he wasn't. Live well, Elena. That's the only revenge worth having. Dad." Elena folded the letter carefully and tucked it into her bag. That evening, back in her hotel room overlooking the city, she stood at the window with her hand on her belly. "We're going to be okay," she whispered to her daughter. "Better than okay." Her phone buzzed again, a message request from Rachel. Elena didn't open it. She didn't need to, because for the first time since the hospital room, Elena felt something solid settle into her chest. Not anger, not grief, power. And she was just getting started. 3 weeks later, the invitations went out. Heavy cream cardstock, subtle embossing. No excess, no flash, just quiet confidence. The Whitmore Brooks Foundation cordially invites you to an intimate dinner reception, Friday evening, 7 p.m., the Metropolitan Club, New York City. 50 envelopes, carefully chosen names, board members, nonprofit leaders, investors, media figures who understood influence without needing it announced. Rachel Lawson received hers at her downtown Austin office. She stared at the card longer than she meant to, pulse quickening. This was big. The Whitmore Brooks Foundation was already being whispered about in professional circles. $500 million dedicated to women's advocacy, housing, education, crisis intervention. This could change everything for her career. She showed Daniel the invitation that night, excitement spilling out of her. If I get on this board, it puts me in an entirely different league. Daniel forced a smile. Yeah, looks impressive. Something about the name tugged at him. Whitmore Brooks. It felt familiar, but he brushed the thought aside. Of course we're going, Rachel added. You should come with me. Daniel hesitated. I don't think spouses are encouraged, she cut in smoothly. Exactly. Image matters. He didn't argue. The Metropolitan Club glowed that evening. Old money elegance filling every corner. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, conversations that carried weight without volume. Elena arrived early. She wore an emerald green maternity gown that draped gracefully over her 7-month belly. Diamond earrings, simple heirloom pieces that had belonged to her grandmother, caught the light when she moved. Her hair was pinned back softly, her posture calm, composed. She didn't feel like she was playing a role. She felt like she'd finally stepped into alignment. Henry stood beside her as guests filtered in. They'll be here, he said quietly. I know, Elena replied. Her voice didn't shake. At 7:18, Daniel and Rachel entered. Elena saw them before they saw her. Rachel looked radiant in a fitted red designer dress, scanning the room with practiced confidence, eyes already cataloging who mattered. Daniel lingered a half step behind her, suddenly aware of how small he felt in a room like this. Then Rachel froze. Her eyes landed on Elena. For half a second, her brain refused to process it. Funeral black was gone. Grief was gone. This woman was glowing, serene, powerful, unmistakably in control. Elena? Rachel whispered. Daniel turned. The color drained from his face. Elena? He said again, louder this time, like if he repeated it, reality might rearrange itself. Henry stepped forward and tapped his glass gently. Ladies and gentlemen, he announced, thank you for joining us tonight. It's my honor to introduce the founder and director of the Whitmore Brooks Foundation, Miss Elena Brooks Whitmore. Applause filled the room. Elena stepped forward. She met Daniel's eyes for just a moment, long enough for him to understand that he had miscalculated everything. 3 months ago, Elena began, voice steady, I lost my father. He was a janitor at an elementary school. He taught me that real wealth isn't what you accumulate, it's how you treat people when no one is watching. She paused. What I didn't know was that my father, Robert Whitmore III, had once walked away from a vast family fortune to marry the woman he loved. He chose love over legacy, and he raised me to do the same. Daniel's hands clenched at his sides. When he passed, Elena continued, he left me his entire estate, but more importantly, he left me a mission. Her eyes moved through the room, then landed back on Daniel, calm, unflinching. 3 months ago, I was 6 months pregnant, newly orphaned, and my husband asked me for a divorce. A ripple moved through the crowd. He told me I wasn't enough, that he'd found someone more ambitious, more successful, someone who fit the life he wanted. Rachel's smile had completely collapsed. He left me because he believed I had nothing. Elena lifted her glass. And I let him go, because you cannot lose what is truly yours, and you cannot keep what was never meant to stay. The applause was thunderous. Daniel couldn't hear it. His ears were ringing. People surged toward Elena with congratulations, introductions, offers of partnership. She moved through them gracefully, her hand resting protectively on her belly, radiating something unbreakable. Rachel backed away slowly. She made it to the elevator, then the parking garage. The scream tore out of her without warning, raw, echoing, uncontrollable. "Oh my God," she sobbed. "Daniel, you left a billionaire. You divorced a billionaire from me." "I didn't know," he stammered. "How was I supposed to know?" "You said she was nothing. You said she was dragging you down. She was carrying $5 billion and a foundation that just destroyed my reputation in one night." She yanked the ring off her finger and threw it at him. "I can't be married to a man stupid enough to walk away from that." She turned and walked away, heels clicking sharply against concrete. Daniel stood alone in the garage, surrounded by the echo of his failure. Upstairs, Elena placed a hand over her heart and felt her daughter kick. Henry leaned in and smiled softly. "Your father would be very proud." "I know," Elena said. "I can feel it." And for the first time, she truly could. 2 months later, Elena gave birth to a healthy baby girl at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. She named her Lily Grace Whitmore. Grace, because that was what had saved her. Lily, because her father used to say lilies survived the harshest conditions and still bloomed beautifully. Elena held her daughter against her chest, tears slipping quietly down her face as Lily's tiny fingers curled around her own. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're loved, and you will never doubt your worth." Daniel was notified after the birth. Elena believed Lily deserved to know her father, even if Daniel had proven unworthy of being her husband. He was granted supervised visits, structured, limited, controlled. When Daniel first saw Lily, something broke in him. She had Elena's eyes. He stood awkwardly in the hospital room, hands shoved into his pockets, regret written all over his face. "She's beautiful," he said quietly. "Yes," Elena replied. "She is." He wanted to say more, wanted to apologize, wanted to explain how he'd misunderstood everything, how he'd let ambition blind him. But Elena didn't ask. She didn't need to hear it. Rachel disappeared from the social circles she once ruled. Within weeks of the gala fallout, rumors followed her into every boardroom and meeting. She transferred to a lower-paying position in Boston, far from New York, far from Austin, far from the parking garage where her scream had become legend. The engagement was quietly dissolved. Daniel tried to call Elena more often after that. At first, it was about Lily. Then it wasn't. "I made a mistake," he said once, voice thick. "I see that now." Elena listened without interruption. When he finished, she said calmly, "I believe you believe that." Then she ended the call. 5 years passed. The Whitmore Brooks Foundation expanded into 8 states. Emergency housing for women fleeing abuse, legal aid, child care grants, education funds. In its first 5 years, over 2,000 women were helped. Rent paid, degrees completed, lives rebuilt. Elena never put her face on the front page. She preferred impact over attention. Lily grew up surrounded by stability, kindness, and quiet strength. On her first day of kindergarten, Elena walked her daughter into Oak Ridge Elementary School in Austin, the same school where her grandfather had worked for decades. The halls smelled faintly of cleaner and crayons. Daniel stood nearby, watching Lily skip ahead confidently, backpack bouncing, waving to teachers who already adored her. "She's fearless," he said softly. "She knows who she is." They stood together for a moment, not as husband and wife, but as two people connected by a child and a shared past. Daniel hesitated. "I've changed," he said. "I understand now. I'd do anything for another chance." Elena smiled gently, not cruelly, not triumphantly. "I know," she said, "but that chance wasn't meant for us." Her eyes followed Lily down the hallway, where she turned once more to wave before disappearing into her classroom. Daniel realized then that Elena wasn't thinking about him at all. She hadn't won by destroying him. She had won by building a life so full that his presence or absence no longer mattered. That night, Elena sat on her porch, Lily asleep beside her, fireflies blinking in the warm Texas air. Her father's words echoed softly in her mind. You are never alone. You are never poor. You are never powerless. Not because of the billions, but because he had raised her to know her worth long before the world tried to take it away. And if you've ever felt abandoned, betrayed, or told you weren't enough, remember this. Sometimes the people who walk away are simply making room for the life you were always meant to live. And Elena Whitmore knew with absolute certainty that her father had been right all along. The months after Lily's birth passed quietly, intentionally so. Elena moved back to Austin not because she needed to, but because she wanted roots for her daughter that felt real. She bought a modest house in a tree-lined neighborhood, nothing extravagant, nothing that screamed money. Just light-filled rooms, a backyard with space for a swing set, and a porch where she could sit at night and breathe. The foundation's work continued to grow, but Elena remained careful about visibility. Her name appeared on documents, not magazine covers. She attended meetings in neutral dresses, drove her own car, and insisted on walking into rooms as a woman, not a headline. Power, she'd learned, didn't need to announce itself. Daniel saw Lily every other Saturday under supervision at first. He was awkward, overly careful, trying too hard. He brought gifts that were too expensive, toys Lily ignored in favor of blocks and crayons. Elena never corrected him. She simply observed. Over time, the supervision was relaxed. Daniel learned how to sit on the floor, how to listen, how to follow Lily's lead instead of directing it. It didn't make him a good husband retroactively. It didn't erase anything, but it made him a better father. And that was enough. One afternoon, when Lily was almost 3, Daniel lingered after a visit. He stood by the doorway, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, eyes scanning the family photos on the wall. Elena noticed how long he paused at the one of her and Lily in front of Oak Ridge Elementary, both of them laughing, sunlight everywhere. You look happy, he said finally. I am, Elena replied honestly. I used to think happiness was more, he said, bigger, louder. Elena smiled faintly. So did I, once. He hesitated. Rachel filed for bankruptcy last year, moved again. She's not doing well. I'm sorry to hear that, Elena said, and meant it. Not with guilt, not with triumph, just acknowledgement. Daniel nodded. I deserved to lose everything I lost. Elena met his eyes. No, you deserved to learn. He exhaled, like that distinction mattered more than he'd expected. When he left, Elena locked the door gently behind him and went to the kitchen where Lily was drawing at the table. Crayon scribbles, big circles, stick figures with impossible smiles. Mommy, Lily said, looking up. Grandpa watches us, right? Elena's throat tightened. Yes, sweetheart, always. That night, after Lily fell asleep, Elena opened the old envelope again. The paper was worn now, folded and unfolded more times than she could count. Her father's handwriting still felt like a hand on her shoulder. Sometimes she wondered how much he'd known, not just about Daniel leaving, but about her becoming this version of herself. Strong, calm, unshakable. She thought about the life she might have lived if things had gone differently, if Daniel had stayed, if she'd never gone to the bank, if she'd never learned the truth. The thought didn't bring sadness, only clarity. The foundation opened a new center that year, emergency housing for women with children, tucked into a quiet neighborhood, designed to feel like home instead of shelter. Elena visited often, sometimes unannounced, sitting with women who didn't know who she was, listening to their stories without offering fixes right away. One woman, barely older than Elena had been when everything fell apart, clutched a sleeping toddler and whispered, "I don't know who I am without him." Elena took her hand. "You're about to find out." Another asked, eyes hollow, "What if I fail?" Elena answered without hesitation, "Then you try again, and again. That's not failure, that's survival." Late one evening, after a long day of meetings, Elena stood in the backyard watching Lily chase fireflies. The air was warm, the sky streaked with orange and purple, the kind of moment that used to slip past unnoticed. Now she held it carefully. Henry called sometimes, checking in, updating her on trust details she barely needed to hear anymore. The numbers no longer defined anything. They were tools, nothing more. "You've changed the way people talk about the Whitmore name," he told her once. Elena smiled faintly. Good. It needed changing. 5 years earlier, she'd stood outside a courthouse believing her life was over. Now she knew better. Life hadn't ended. It had cleared space. And as Elena tucked Lily to bed that night, brushing hair from her daughter's forehead, she whispered the same words her father had spoken to her for years. "You are brilliant. You are worthy. You are loved beyond measure." Lily smiled in her sleep, and Elena knew, without question, that the cycle had been broken. Not by money, not by revenge, but by choosing, every single day, to live well. Years settled into a rhythm that felt almost ordinary, and Elena learned to treasure that more than anything. Mornings began early, Lily padded into the kitchen in mismatched socks, hair sticking up in impossible directions, announcing plans that changed daily: astronaut, veterinarian, teacher, all before breakfast. Elena listened seriously to every one of them, flipping pancakes, packing lunches, anchoring their days in small, steady rituals. This was the life her father had wanted for her, not the money, not the power, the peace. The foundation continued to grow quietly in the background. New programs launched, partnerships formed, but Alina kept her role deliberate and contained. She chaired meetings, signed documents, approved budgets, but she also volunteered anonymously, sitting beside women in crisis centers, folding laundry, reading to children whose mothers needed 10 minutes to breathe. Most of them never knew who she was. She preferred it that way. One afternoon, while reviewing reports at home, Elena received an unexpected email. The subject line read simply, "Thank you." It was from a woman named Claire, someone Elena barely remembered meeting years earlier at one of the first shelters. "I don't know if you remember me," the email began. "I was the woman who showed up with 2 trash bags and a 4-year-old who wouldn't stop crying. You sat with me on the floor. You didn't give advice, you just listened." Elena closed her eyes. "I finished my nursing degree last month. My son starts first grade in the fall. We're safe. I'm safe. I just wanted you to know you didn't save me. You reminded me I could save myself." Elena sat back in her chair, letting the words settle. This was the real inheritance. That evening, she picked Lily up from after-school care. Lily burst through the door, breathless with excitement. "Mom, guess what?" "What?" Elena asked, bracing herself. "I told my class about Grandpa," Lily said proudly. "I said he cleaned the school and that he was the nicest man in the world." Elena's throat tightened. "That sounds exactly right." "He would have liked you," Lily added thoughtfully. "I think so too." They drove home in comfortable silence, the sun dipping low over the road. At a red light, Elena noticed a familiar car in the lane beside them. Daniel. He glanced over, startled, then lifted a hand in a small wave. Elena nodded politely. Lily waved enthusiastically, pressing her face to the window. "Daddy!" Lily shouted. Daniel smiled, a real one this time, eyes soft with something like acceptance. The light changed. They drove on separate paths. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Elena stood in the doorway of her daughter's room, watching her chest rise and fall. She thought about the version of herself who once begged a man to stay, who measured her worth through someone else's ambition, who believed survival meant endurance instead of choice. That woman felt distant now, not erased, just evolved. She walked back into the living room and opened the old shoebox she still kept tucked away. Inside were a few photos, the envelope, her father's letter folded thin from time. She read it again, slowly. Trust the plan. For years, she thought the plan was about timing, about waiting, about revelation. Now she understood. The plan had never been about wealth or exposure or consequences for Daniel or Rachel. It had been about transformation, about stripping everything down to what mattered and rebuilding with intention. There was a knock at the door. Elena frowned, checking the time. Too late for neighbors. She opened it to find Mrs. Alvarez, older now, leaning on a cane, holding a small paper bag. "I was in the neighborhood," she said warmly. "Thought I'd stop by." Elena smiled and ushered her in. They sat at the kitchen table sharing cookies and tea like they'd done years ago. "I saw Lily at school last week," Mrs. Alvarez said. "She's got your father's eyes, same kindness." Elena swallowed. He'd be so proud. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "He always knew who you were going to be, even when you didn't." After she left, Elena cleaned the kitchen slowly, deliberately, grounding herself in the normalcy of it all. She realized then that there was nothing left to prove, no one left to confront, no victory to display. Her life spoke for itself. Outside, the night settled in, cicadas humming, stars faint but steady. Elena stepped onto the porch and sat, wrapping a sweater around her shoulders, breathing in the quiet. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped surviving. She was living. And that, she knew, was the ending her father had written for her long before she ever knew the story had begun. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharp edges without erasing the scars. By the time Lily turned 9, Elena had learned how to carry the past without letting it weigh her down. The memories were still there, folded neatly into who she was, but they no longer dictated her steps. They simply informed them. Life had settled into something steady and deeply satisfying. Weekdays were busy in the best way. School drop-offs, homework spread across the kitchen table, Lily's endless questions about everything from black holes to why people lied when the truth was easier. Elena answered each one honestly, never talking down, never rushing. Because sometimes, she told her daughter one evening, people are afraid of who they'd have to become if they were honest. Lily thought about that for a long moment. "That sounds sad." "It can be," Elena agreed, "but it doesn't have to be our story." The foundation had grown far beyond what Elena originally imagined. What started as crisis support expanded into long-term empowerment, education, mental health care, legal advocacy. Elena still visited centers quietly, without announcement. She preferred listening to speeches. One afternoon, during a visit to a shelter outside San Antonio, a young woman recognized her. "You're her," the woman said, eyes wide. "You're Elena Whitmore." Elena hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." The woman laughed softly, almost disbelieving. "I read about you, about what you built." Elena sat down beside her anyway. "Tell me about you." That was how she always redirected it. Fame had never been the point. Impact was. Daniel remained a distant but respectful presence in Lily's life. He showed up when he said he would. He no longer asked questions that crossed lines. Regret had settled into him like a permanent weather pattern. Quiet, gray, accepted. At a school play one spring, Elena and Daniel sat a few seats apart, clapping as Lily bowed on stage, face glowing with pride. "She gets that confidence from you," Daniel said softly during intermission. Elena smiled. "She gets it from knowing she's safe." He nodded, absorbing that without defense. After the play, Lily ran to Elena first, then hugged her father. There was no confusion about where her center was. Children always know. Later that night, Elena stood in the kitchen washing dishes while Lily did homework. "Mom," Lily said suddenly, pencil paused, "do you think Grandpa knew how everything would turn out?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I think he trusted that it would." Lily nodded, satisfied. "I like that." So did Elena. On the anniversary of her father's death each year, Elena and Lily visited Oak Ridge Elementary. They brought flowers and left them near the janitor's supply room, not because anyone else needed to see it, but because it felt right. "He used to sing while he worked," Mrs. Alvarez told Lily once. "Did you know that?" Lily giggled. "Mom sings too." Elena smiled, heart full. Years earlier, Elena believed justice meant watching others realize what they'd lost. Now she understood that justice had already happened quietly, decisively, the moment she chose to live well. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Elena sat at her desk and opened a new document. She'd resisted this for years, but something told her it was time. She began to write, not a memoir, not an exposé, but letters. To women who felt invisible, to daughters who had lost fathers, to anyone who had been told they were too small, too late, too much. She wrote about grief, about betrayal, about power that doesn't shout. She wrote until dawn. When she finished, she saved the file with a simple name: Trust the Plan. Elena leaned back in her chair, exhaustion and peace settling over her at the same time. Outside, the sky was lightening. A new day. And somewhere in the quiet between night and morning, Elena felt it again, the certainty she'd grown into over years of choosing herself. She hadn't been abandoned. She had been guided. And the life she stood in now, steady, meaningful, deeply hers, was proof that sometimes the worst moments are not the end of the story. They're the beginning of the right one. Lily turned 13 the summer everything finally felt complete. Not perfect, Elena had long stopped believing in perfect, but whole in a way that didn't require effort to maintain. Their days flowed easily now, shaped by habits that had grown naturally over time. Mornings started with music in the kitchen. Lily liked old songs, ones her grandfather would have known, and she sang loudly and off-key while Elena packed lunches or pretended not to dance along. They argued playfully about chores, negotiated screen time, laughed more than they didn't. It felt normal, and Elena never forgot how precious that was. The foundation reached a milestone that year: 10,000 women supported across the country. No gala, no press tour, just a quiet internal meeting where the numbers were read aloud and then set aside so they could talk about what mattered next. "What's the gap we're missing?" Elena asked the room. A young program director hesitated. "Girls aging out of foster care. They're invisible the moment they turn 18. Elena nodded slowly. "Then that's where we go next." She drove home afterward with the windows down, thinking about all the ways the world let people fall through cracks and how often it did so without noticing. That night, Lily sat cross-legged on her bed, sorting through old school papers for a project. She pulled out a yellow drawing from kindergarten, a stick-figure man holding a mop, standing next to a little girl with a big smile. "This is Grandpa," Lily said proudly. "I know," Elena replied, sitting beside her. "My teacher asked why I drew him. I told her because he was important." Elena swallowed. "He was." "No," Lily said seriously, "he still is." Elena hugged her daughter tightly, breathing her in, grateful beyond words. Daniel came by the next afternoon to take Lily for lunch. He'd aged, lines around his eyes, hair graying at the temples, but something about him had softened. The sharp edges were gone. "I got an offer to move," he said quietly to Elena while Lily grabbed her shoes. "Chicago, better rolled, more stable." Elena nodded. "And Lily?" "I'd stay close," he said quickly. "I wouldn't go without making sure." "I trust you," Elena said, surprising them both. And she meant it. He looked relieved. "Thank you." When they left, Elena stood on the porch watching them go, not with longing or regret, but with the calm acceptance of someone who no longer feared being left behind. She went inside and opened the old shoebox one last time. The envelope was worn thin now, the edges soft, her father's words lived inside her even without the paper, but she kept it anyway, not as proof, not as protection, but as memory. She placed it back gently and closed the lid. Some things didn't need to be carried everywhere anymore. That evening, Elena and Lily sat outside watching the sunset paint the sky in layers of orange and pink. Fireflies flickered in the yard, just like they had years ago. "Mom," Lily said, leaning her head on Elena's shoulder, "do you think people change?" Elena thought about Daniel, about Rachel, about herself. "Yes," she said, "but only when they're ready to tell themselves the truth." Lily nodded. "I like who you are." Elena smiled, eyes stinging. "I like who you're becoming." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Elena felt it again, that quiet certainty her father had planted in her long before everything fell apart. She had built something real, not out of money, but out of choice. And she knew, with absolute clarity, that if everything were stripped away tomorrow, every asset, every title, she would still stand. Because the truest inheritance her father left her was never in a bank vault. It was the unshakable knowledge that she was enough. Always had been, always would be. Where are you watching this from? Lagos? New York? London? Somewhere else? Drop your location in the comments right now. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that you're stronger than you know, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Because you are never powerless. You just might not know it yet. Thanks for watching, and remember, the best revenge is living.